Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Kenny Vaughan. He's going to share stories about playing guitar for over 20 years with Marty Stuart.
The first time I met him was at a horrible outdoor concert down in like Alabama or something during the day. And it was one of those festivals, a country music festival. And this probably would have been in the 90s. That's the first time I met him backstage, but I don't think he remembers it. I remember there was like backstage, it was like in the dirt where all the trucks and stuff were parked, buses and equipment trucks. There's a big stage out in the middle of a field, that they put up this awful thing. It's hot and nasty. And I remember there was raw sewage that I ruined my cowboy boots. I didn't know that I was wading through raw sewage. There was just like, I was literally walking through shit, and I had to throw my boots away. They were so smelly, it was like they were ruined. But yeah, I was introduced to him, but he doesn't remember that. But then I think he saw me on TV a couple of times on Austin City Limits and things like that. And remember Fanfare, the CMA festival and all that stuff, I was playing at some god-awful daytime showcase, Remember in the 90s, things were different than they are now, It was still people playing more country-ish kind of music than it is now, And I was playing with this guy at this thing at like noon, I'm down at some kind of restaurant kind of club on Broadway. I don't remember where it was. It was down there where all those places are, those honky-tonks on, Lower Broad. And it was in the daytime. There was a lot of people there, and he was backstage all of a sudden. I was like, hey, and he comes up to me and says, hey, let me get your number, man. Well, so he called me, and we went to lunch, and he asked me to start a band with him. So I said, okay. They were always fun. Every gig I've ever played with him is fun. He likes to have fun on stage. He goes out there to have a good time, and he always does.
How many dates a year were you guys doing back then?
Oh, I don't know how many. At first, it was a little bit slow. We were maybe doing 50 or 60, right in there, that area, which was, I've been staying home and playing a lot of recording sessions, and I was glad to go back out and do something like that, because I really wasn't enjoying my work rather very much, playing recording sessions all the time. It got to be like, this isn't really for me, It wasn't very fulfilling. And I was glad to go out and do something like that. I didn't believe that it would last very long, but that was 23 years ago. So, the music business is pretty, slippery. You don't really imagine that something would last that long. Well, it was fun for me because there was a lot of fun guitar playing going on that I enjoyed. I enjoyed his style and he enjoyed my style. So it was sort of like, we could easily play with each other. For two guitars and bass and drums, it was a fun little act, to play in. A lot of room to have fun, and it was very informal in a lot of ways. He's always been one of those guys that he writes out a set list, but he never follows it. He always jumps off of it when somebody will say something, he'll start playing a song, and we fall in behind him. He's very spontaneous in that way. But we have a lot of songs, man. We must have 150 at least that we can. If he starts playing them, we all just we go fall in right behind him, and everybody knows their parts, and great vocals and all that stuff. Three good singers. Those guys are really good. So the vocal stuff is really great.
I'm going to embarrass you, but I think it's the best band out there.
Oh, thanks. Well, I mean, for what we do, I don't think there's a lot of people doing what we do, in that sort of looser, sort of casual sort of presentation, Everybody's a little bit more formal than we are. Oh, he's always done that. Yeah, he got that from when he worked for Johnny Cash. Yeah, he said Johnny Cash had a song for every town he played in. He always had a thing. And so he sort of, he played with Cash for like 10 years. So I think he picked that up from him and sort of built on it, That's definitely a gag that he got off of Johnny. But it's a good gag. It's great. And he played some really cool tunes that I didn't know, It's really, and people love it when you do that, Especially if it's a really great song. And most of them haven't heard these songs. These are songs that were written back in the 50s and 60s. So people in a town always like it if you can give them something from their own place. Maybe they haven't heard it, but it kind of nails the history of it. It's like, yeah, all right, yeah, That's our town. They like that. The first gig I played with him wasn't with the band that we have. It was with some of his old guys in his 90s band. And I think that he probably used it to check me out, on stage with him, and it was in Chicago at the House of Blues. I think we were already going to put together a band, but he probably just had me out to, he took that gig and threw together his old band, and we went up and played the show, and that was it, And then the first gig we did with the band, with Harry and Brian and me, was the Wheeling Jamboree, which is a great gig. Because that's, the Wheeling Jamboree was every bit as popular as the WLAC Barn Dance, which was the biggest, live radio program in country music, and the second biggest was the Grand Ole Opry. And then Wheeling was as big as either of those at one time. Wheeling Jamboree was a big-ass radio program. That was every Saturday. And it was great, man. I loved playing in that joint. So it was just, Wheeling, West Virginia is a weird place, Have you ever been there? Oh, yeah. It's cool. It's like going back in time, man. You feel like you're in the middle of the last century when you're there. It's pretty cool. Well, the Wheeling Jamboree, it's still sort of, they still kind of keep it going. I think we played there about 6 years ago or something like that, and I was like, wow, this place is still here. That's great, man. But it's not really what it was, It was really a viable force in music, at one time. Lots of stars came out of there, and, it was really something back in the 1950s and 1960s. It was very powerful. There's certainly a lot of things I could mention that should be highlights, like we played on a lot of big shows, with other people, Chris Stapleton, or, working with Mike Campbell, in Hollywood and stuff like that, working at Capitol Records, and Bob Dylan came in the room to say hi to Marty, that kind of stuff's fun, that's a highlight. Bob Dylan comes in and says, hey, Marty, he gives him a big hug, how you doing, man? I see you have your whole band here. I'm Bob. When we did that Marty Stuart TV show, I think we started in 2007 and ended in 2012. We did 26 episodes a year. We did 156 episodes. We had Willie Nelson on. That was a highlight. Playing with Willie, yeah. He always has a joke for you. He comes in and opens with, like at rehearsal, he's like, come over, and tells a dirty joke or whatever, He's a joke guy. He's funny. And Merle Haggard was on twice. And we used to go to his house a lot, Merle Haggard's house. That was a highlight. Sit around Merle Haggard's den and talk about country music. It's fun. Because he's like a kid when he talks about country music. He's just he's as much of a fan of it as anybody is. So, we'd end up talking about, Bob Dunn, the steel guitar player for Milton Brown, and his, that kind of stuff. Nobody plays like Bob Dunn, that kind of stuff. I talk about Lefty Frizzell, and you're sitting in Merle Haggard's house, and he's telling you stories that you can't believe he's telling you. And he's obviously he's telling the truth, because he's, you know, you can see it in his eyes as he's reminiscing, you know. He liked us because we would listen to him, you know, and we were really wanted to hear what he had to say, you know. And it was really great to do that. We got to record some at his studio with him, and he played a record for us, man. Right, you know, a couple of years before he passed, we've been out there all day. And he says, "I got something to play for you guys." You know, he just plays this record. He played probably 7 or 8 songs off this record on his speakers in his studio, you know. And some of the lyrics were outrageous. I mean, and I remember, I looked at him one time when this lyric went by, and he looked at me like, "Oh, you heard that, did you?" Kind of look on his, and like, "That's right, that's what I said," you know. And I was like, "Whoa," you know. And I hope it comes out, man. But it's pretty edgy. It was pretty good, man. I was like, the old man still got something to say, you know. And I don't know if it'll ever come out. You know, he appreciates people, and I think when they come around us, they have an audience. You know, they know that they can tell us their stories, and we'll listen, and we love it. You know, we're like the pupils. You know, Johnny Western is one of them. You know who Johnny Western is? Do you remember the TV show about the gunslinger Paladin? Have gun will travel. Well, that's Johnny Western. Have gun will travel, reads the card of a man. Remember that song? Yeah. Paladin, Paladin, where do you roam? That's Johnny Western. He wrote that tune. He was Gene Autry's right-hand man. So wherever Gene went, Johnny was his guy. You know, valet, you know, pull the car up, pick me up kind of guy. Let's go out and do this now. You know, we're going to go over to this rodeo and do this thing. And then, you know, they travel all over the world, him and Autry. So you can imagine, you know, I mean, Gene Autry was a big star. So Johnny was doing this, you know, like in the 50s and 60s and 70s, traveling around with Gene Autry. And plus he had that record, Paladin. And it became a TV show theme, you know, and so it was like, and he was a disc jockey, and he told the best stories, man. What a guy. Gene Autry stories, you know. It's like, wow. Yeah. In Arizona at the time, we've run into him several times. He was at our show in Phoenix a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago maybe. And Marty introduced him, you know, and Johnny's showbiz trained, you know. We were in this nice auditorium, and ladies and gentlemen, we have country music royalty, you know, Mr. Johnny Western. And Johnny stood up and looked out over the audience, you know, and from his seat, you know, and did, you know, it was so great, you know. It's like, it's out of a movie, man. It's like, did you guys rehearse that, you know? It's so good. But I remember when I was, when my parents moved to Kansas in 1972, I believe, I didn't go with them, you know. It was like, no way, I'm not going to Kansas, man. But I went to visit them a couple of times, you know, well, a lot, actually, over the years. But first couple of times I went to visit them, they lived about 40 miles outside of Wichita. So he picked me up, my dad would pick me up at the airport in Wichita, and we'd drive me back. And you know, we were listening to country music radio, and Johnny Western's a DJ in Wichita. I was like, that's Johnny Western. And I said, yeah. My dad's like, yeah, he's the disc jockey on this station. I was like, wow, Johnny freaking Western. Yeah. I was like really excited about that. So he lived in Wichita for a long time and was on that radio station there, the big country station.
Did you tell him that when you met him?
Yeah. He said he was there a long time. I guess after Gene died, he probably had to figure out what he was going to do with his life, you know.
When you guys do fly dates with Marty, how do you handle backline and stuff like that?
We tend to not do that very much. You know, it's never been any fun, and you know, it's difficult. We're picky because, you know, I'm one of those guys that I don't like amplifiers that were made after 1975. No matter what anybody says, I just don't get along with them, you know. So, you know, I don't like playing through new stuff at all. It's like, ugh. You know, I'm spoiled because I own vintage gear that sounds good, and when you have to play something that's almost like that, but it's not quite as good, that certain something that you can't describe, that doesn't happen. It's like a two-dimensional sort of simulation, or one-dimensional, maybe is a better term. It's like, it doesn't have that sound that you feel like you can reach into, you know. It just sounds like it's just flat right up against, you know, your ear. Like, I don't know, sounds stiff, you know. So that's never any fun. But we don't do that too much, really. We have to go over to England and do a bunch of dates later on this year. And I'll try and get Fender to provide a couple amps that I like over there. They make a pretty good amp. That the Chris Stapleton model amplifier that they make is okay. It's not bad. I can get by on it. Doesn't sound like my Princeton's, but it sounds pretty good. He really worked hard with them on that. He wouldn't let them release it until he was happy with it. And I think it's pretty good. So I'm going to try and get a couple of those to play.
Will Marty bring Clarence Telecaster?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've only done one show without it. It was a fly date in Canada, and it was a big festival, and the guitars didn't arrive in time from the airport. And so Bernie Ledden was on the show, and he had a real good pull string. So fortunately, Marty was able to borrow that, and it was fine. He didn't like it because it wasn't his guitar, you know, but it was a good working instrument. And Bernie's a great pull string player. I saw him with the Eagles when they first on their first tour. I remember thinking, I really like that guy. And I remember thinking, I really like that bass player, man. He's Randy Meisner, he's cool, and Bernie Ledden is cool. I don't know about these other guys, man. There was something about them I didn't like. I don't know what it was, but you know, I was like, our band is really great in that if somebody's not feeling well, the other three kind of pick them up, you know. I mean, it just happens when you go on stage, you know. By the end of the show, you'll be feeling fine. You know, I've done the show many times when I was really ill, you know. But you know, one night I had to sit down on a chair because I had food poisoning. And I was in the locker room, dressing room, laying on a table, you know, until the show time, and they were like, "You think you can do it?" And I said, "Just give me a chair and I'll see what I can do." And I don't really remember playing the show. All I know is I made it through somehow. You know, I was really sick. I mean, and it was one of those things that was food poisoning. You know, so it's like when you have that, there's no way out until it's out. You know, it's like whoa. I was deathly ill, man. But yeah, we sort of seems like, but you know, if somebody's not feeling well, the other three will pick up the slack and the show goes on, you know. But it's mostly pretty good. I think sometimes we put it in a soft bag and we buy a seat for it, you know. Sometimes that's been the thing we had to do, depending on what. But I've been in airports where it came down in the hard road case, and there'll be, you know, I'll see Marty talking to some guy who's obviously a guitar player, and he'll get it out and open it up in the airport and hand it to the guy. Here it is, you know. And the guy's like, whoa, you know. It's like the Holy Grail, you know. You know, something that they would never imagine that they would be holding, you know. And there it is, you know. I've seen him do that a lot.
How does it suit your particular taste?
Oh, it's like playing a different instrument from what it's I can't really play it. It's so weird. It's really heavy, and it's my guitars are set up much differently, you know, just with the type of strings and the frets and all that stuff. You know, his is different from mine, so I can't really catch a buzz playing it, you know. But when he plays it, it's awesome. It's amazing. I mean, he bought that instrument from Clarence White's widow, and the guy that brought him to town was Clarence White's brother, Roland White. He was a mandolin player. He'd been playing for Lester Flatt, and he was getting ready to quit, and he knew Marty was a really good young 13-year-old mandolin player, you know. He knew who he was, and somehow he arranged for Lester to, you know, listen to Marty. Maybe Marty got up at a festival and played with him or something. I don't know, but Roland made the connection. And I think when Marty lived in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and when Lester hired him, you know, she put him on a bus for Nashville, you know. And he rode a bus with his mandolin and his suitcase, and that was it, you know. And I think he lived at Roland's house for a little while. He also lived at Lester's house for a little while. But anyway, so Roland had some Byrds records, and when he was staying at Roland's house, he was like, who are these Byrds, you know, what is this stuff, you know? And he didn't ever listen to the classic Byrds stuff. He listened to the stuff with Clarence, and not the stuff that was, you know, Clarence played on some records that he wasn't credited on for the Byrds, you know. But then when he actually joined the band, those records are the ones that Marty heard first. And he didn't discover the real Byrds until, you know, maybe in the last 20 years, where he finally figured out what that was all about and got into that end of it, you know. But he was really into those Byrds records that Clarence played on. And so he finally kept asking about, you know, stuff, and found out that she lived in Kentucky and that she was wanting to sell the Stratocaster and the Telecaster and an amplifier or two. And Marty went up there, and I think he bought the Stratocaster and the Telecaster both, and sold the Stratocaster maybe later. He's not a Stratocaster guy. He doesn't like them. And I think it was in the attic, you know, and he went up there and made a deal and wrote her a check. His mom worked at a bank, and his mom and dad moved up from Philadelphia, Mississippi, when maybe within the first year or two of Marty living here. He was still a teenager, so his mom still lives out there in Smyrna in the house they moved to.
He's the perfect person to have that, because he's going to play it, appreciate it. He understands the importance of it.
Oh yeah, well, you know, he somehow acquired all those cassette recordings of Clarence in the dressing room warming up, and all of his. He's collected all the different sessions that Clarence played for other artists. You know, he did a lot of work in the West Coast. You know, playing a lot of cool records. Some that I've heard recently that I was unaware of that were really good. Yeah.
Does Marty have you have a Pop Staples guitar?
Yeah, we were playing in Chicago at Fitzgerald's back in the early 2000s, and the Yvonne Staples and Mavis Staples came to visit at the gig, and they were up on our bus, and they said, "You guys stay here for a minute. We got something we got to go get. Wait right here." So, you know, they come back and they're carrying this guitar case, and we opened it up, and I said, "That's the Last Waltz guitar." And Mavis was like, "Mm-hmm. We want you to have this, Marty." Yeah, we want you to have this. And Marty's like, "Wow." And I picked it up. It was still tuned out in a half step, you know, like pops, you know, it was like, "Oh, this really is that guitar." And I was like, looking at it. And so he was, it's a rosewood Telecaster, one of those heavy rosewood things. But it was the one that was probably made in the early 70s. And then at some point, Pops had it outfitted with a Fender wide range Café magnet pickup in the neck position. And those were kind of popular in the mid-70s, those Café magnet pickups. And Fender made those for a while. And so that was on there. And then he had also put on a big, heavy brass bridge in place of the regular Telecaster bridge. Same size and shape, just it was a big brass plate with brass saddles. He installed that, and I think those are the only modifications. But so Marty was like, wow, this is cool, So we were on a bus that it wasn't our regular bus. We were on a bus the bus company sent it was like a one-nighter in Chicago, and so we took that bus up there, and there were all these videos in the drawer beneath the seat on the bus. And I was going through there, and there was the Last Waltz video. So we're riding back to Nashville from Chicago that night. There's the guitar, and we put it in, and I'm looking at it and said, there's that guitar, man. He's playing it, but he hadn't done the modifications yet. And but it's there, that's it. Those are rare guitars. Anyway, they didn't make a lot of rosewood tellies at that time. George Harrison had the most famous one, the Let It Be guitar. They sent that over. Fender sent the Beatles a bunch of gear, Fender amps, and which they used in the Let It Be thing. Those are all Fender amps that they've got in that shipment. And Paul got a jazz bass and a P bass, I think, and they got a 6-string bass that John and George played quite a bit. Marty's known those staple singers a long time, and when Pops got to where he couldn't play anymore, he would call Marty up and make Marty come play, because you're the only man that can play my style, So he would do that, and he was actually he was a pallbearer at the funeral, Pop's funeral. But the funny thing about that good story about the guitar, when I said, wow, man, this is amazing. You guys are giving this to him. We had to get it. Purvis had it. That's her brother. And we went over there, and he was taking a shower. We got out of the closet while he was in the shower. He's just going to sell it. We wanted to go somewhere where it would be appreciated, somebody that won't sell it, that'll play music on it, They took it from Purvis when he was in the shower. I went over to his apartment to visit,
I know he has a lot of historically significant instruments.
Yeah.
What are some other ones that I don't know?
Well, the one that's the best one really is I think a 38 or 39 D45 that belonged at one point. Audrey Williams bought it at Hughley's Music Used and gave it to Hank Williams. And the receipt is still in there. Hughley Music receipt is in the case. It's still in the case, yeah.
D45 is the really ornate one,
That's the king of the Martin line. That's the big daddy.
They stopped making those World War II because of
the materials,
supplies.
yeah. They probably had to scale back production on a lot of things. And after, I don't know how Johnny Cash got it, but he owned it for a while, and he has on the bottom down on the treble side, of the bit larger side, down below the pick guard there's a little square rectangle, I guess it is. That's an ornate inlay with like mother of pearl and stuff. It says Cash. He played it for a long, long time. And Marty had something that Cash wanted, and Cash kept trying to buy it from him, and Marty wouldn't. So I'll trade you for that guitar, but no, Eventually Cash caved and made the deal.
You don't know what he traded for?
I can't remember what it was. Johnny had a lot of guitars. He had a ton of guitars, but I don't know. if that's the one. I would assume that that's the only one he owned. I've never seen a picture of him playing a D45. So, but I know that Martin made some black Martins for Johnny Cash. It's really loud. It sounds like a Steinway piano. It's just amazing how loud it is. It's a banjo killer. You could play it, out in the field with a bluegrass outfit, and you'd be able to hear yourself. It's really loud. And it plays really well. It's a very modern feeling neck. It's very fast neck. It doesn't feel clunky at all. Surprisingly, it's really in great shape. I mean, for a 30s instrument, it's good. It's no problems. Sounds great. This thing is exceptionally loud, all the way across the board. It's just loud. And it's good in the studio for certain kind of things, but it's not good for a lot of things because it is so loud. It doesn't really, but it's a beautiful thing, man. I love it. I would say that's probably that's pretty cool. Guitar that once belonged to Johnny Cash, that once belonged to Hank Williams. That's pretty cool.
Who does he, if he has to have something done, does he take it to Glazer? Who's he take it to?
There's a guy named Marty Lanham that is one of the long-time acoustic guitar repairman guys and builders in Nashville. He goes all the way back to the old-time pick and parlor and all that kind of stuff. He's a really nice guy, man. He's a great Martin guy. Really good. He's considered one of the best Martin repairmen in the world. He's really good. Really nice cat. Marty's kind of funny. He's owned a lot of guitars over the years, and he gets rid of a lot of stuff. He purged a bunch of stuff a couple of years ago. Well, in the last 10 years, he got rid of a whole lot of stuff. But most of his actual collection of stuff that he actually plays, he does use it all, I think. He doesn't really keep stuff around that he's not using, unless it's a iconic instrument. Like he has quite a few of Luther Perkins guitars. And, I think he's not going to get rid of those, He has, several of Luther's Jaguars and an Esquire and a Telly. He has quite a few. Leo Fender loved Luther. So every time they were in, Johnny lived in Casita Springs, California, and so every time the band was out there working, they'd go over to Fender, and Luther would give anybody whatever they wanted. Leo would give anybody in Cash's band, which was Luther or the bass player. The bass player was an upright player until he finally got an electric bass, and then he never played upright again. But the funny thing is that Epiphone gave him a bass, a Newport bass, and which is the same thing as the Gibson SG bass. It just has a different body shape, but it's the same thing. So he had that, and Fender gave him, it's like, well, I need a bass amp, And so they said, well, try this one. Oh, no, that's too heavy. And so he ended up with a Fender Pro Reverb, right? He didn't want the twin because it was too heavy. So he's got a 212 guitar amp, open back, and that's what you hear on, Folsom Prison album and what's the other prison album? San Quentin. On those recordings, you were listening to Marshall Grant playing his Epiphone bass through a Fender Pro Reverb, which was selected because it was compact, single. You pick it up with your hand, with a handle, and put it in the car, and that was the criteria. I could lift it. Had nothing to do with the sound.
I think we get a little more precious than the people we grew up listening to.
Well,
sound.
When you listen to that record, it sounds great. That's great. What a bunch of misfits, man. This guy's the weirdest people in the world, man. I know that those guys had to have read Mad Magazine constantly. And his particularly oddball humor, it's all Mad Magazine. That's where it all came from. I'm convinced.
Have you met presidents with Marty?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. George W. Bush. We played a Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Washington, and he was the president at the time. It's not a political event. It happens every year. Out in front of the White House on the lawn there, they have this big gala thing, you know, it's a big deal. And so he was required to come, you know, they had a little area off the side of the stage where he and the First Lady had to sit and watch us play, you know. And he was probably dreading it, you know. I got to listen to some band from Nashville play, you know. Pretend like I like it, you know. But afterwards, he invited us over to a party at the White House, you know. So we went over there, and it was all Republicans that had helped him get elected. It was a party for them. It was like, I guess he hadn't been in office very long. So we were, you know, rubbing elbows with all these Republican people. I got my picture made with him, you know, I'm in my cowboy suit, you know, and him and the First Lady, you know, I got a picture of me. And so they were really nice, you know. They were very nice, very complimentary. And then after he was president, we were playing at some rodeo in Oklahoma, and he was our opening act. He got up and spoke to the crowd for like 20 minutes, you know, before we went on. And it was funny because he and the First Lady got out of their limo backstage, and he says, "Hey, Kenny, how you doing?" and, you know, apparently they must have somebody that feeds them all the names, you know. Yeah. But they both took, you know, pointedly spoke my name and asked me how I was doing, you know. And then we played some event many years after that down in that part of the world somewhere, and it was a thing for the first responders. He was there, and he came over and hung out with us. His mother had been ill, and I said, "How's your mom doing?" You know, and he was like, "Well, thanks for asking. You know, I appreciate that. You know, he's a real nice guy." And I remember I met Clinton. That was before I ever worked with Marty. I met him. I was working for Kim Ritchie, and we were playing at the Birchmeadow. And she, after sound check, or no, before sound check, yeah, well, it was when we woke up. She said, "Hey, Al Gore and Tipper Gore is going to be here tonight. They're coming to see us. They're big fans of mine. They're going to come down." So, you know, that's cool. And then, like an hour later, she says, "They're bringing Bill and Hillary with them." And this is like before the Monica Lewinsky thing ever happened, you know. Yeah. And so, you know, I get out of the bus and go in the back door of the Birchmeadow, which I've done millions of times, you know, and walk out. And there's a Secret Service guy, and he says, "Good afternoon, Mr. Vaughan. How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. How are you?" You know, what's going on here? I walk in the backstage, and there's this, you know, like 3 dressing rooms and a green room. And one of the dressing rooms has all this, there's a big giant stretcher on wheels and all this medical gear set up. I'm like, "What's going on here?" You know, so the president's going to be here. You know. So, you know.
They're prepared in case the president collapses or something?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of gear in there. And it's before the show, and I hear this Secret Service guy comes in and he says, "President will be here in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. You know, a couple minutes later, "The president will be here in 1 minute and 19 seconds, or something like that, you know. And in walks Bill with Hillary behind him, and Al and Tipper, you know. He's like dressed, he's got like a jean cowboy shirt, jeans, cowboy boots, and he's looking like $10 million. It's like Elvis just walked in, you know. It's like, whoa. dude has charisma here. He hasn't even done anything, just walks in, like looking around, and he, starts making the rounds, shaking hands. And I had my guitar on. I had a Gibson Les Paul. And he comes by me, and he had just signed an autograph for somebody. I said, Mr. President, will you sign my guitar? And he did. And then Hillary comes by, and I said, will you sign? And she did. And they dated it. And I didn't know this at the time, but they had a White House photographer, and he was taking pictures. And there's a picture of Bill. I'm holding the guitar, and he's signing the guitar, right? I have it,
Wow.
So, for proof. It was so funny, and I just started laughing, I was like, wow, what a scene. And so we go out to play the show, and they're sitting at the table right directly in front of me. The Gores and the Clintons, sitting there looking at me,
You didn't tell Tipper you were a Frank Zappa fan.
Well, that Frank Zappa had her play drums with him.
Really?
Yeah, they became friends.
Wow.
Yeah. They became real good friends. And Frank knew her family, and she knew his family. And Frank sort of, the olive branch was, you're a drummer. Will you sit in with my band? If you're going to come to the show, will you sit in with me? And she's like, sure, So I don't know what they played, but some old rock and roll song or something, But she used to play drums when she was in high school in a rock and roll band, So they became pals.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, most people don't. I don't think it was publicized, but I found out because I was asking her about all that stuff,
What's your earliest memories of Chris?
Oh, that was easy. I was at his mom's house, a Saturday afternoon barbecue, and probably about 87, something like that. And there was this little kid running around, and I said, Gail, your son's kind of wild. He was, just like, and she said, oh, Christopher's a genius. Turns out she was right. But I didn't see him again until he was in his teens. And he started working down on Broadway at Layla's. And I used to play at Roberts and Layla's. And so I played some stuff where he was on maybe a few times. And I'd go over there and watch him when he was working with the Shack Shakers at Layla's. And he was like 16, 17 years old. And he had a deal. He was going to Hillsborough High. He was the only person at Hillsborough High with his cuffed jeans and a pompadour and a white T-shirt, That was his engineer boots and whatever, or Converse or whatever, But he didn't fit in there, I'm sure. But he had a deal. Well, Layla signed on to be his guardian while he was working in the nightclub there, so he could do it, first of all. And there was legal paperwork. And he got credit at Hillsborough every time he played a show at Layla's. So he was down there all the time playing with the Shack Shakers and whoever else. I think sometimes he played in there by himself, just a solo performer when he was a teenager. I mean, he was getting credit at Hillsborough, and that's how he started playing on Broadway, and that's how I got to kind of connect with him. And he was running in the same circle, BR 549 guys. He eventually was in BR 549.
That's the first place I ever met him, was in somewhere in North Carolina, the neighborhood theater. And he was probably 18 then. And
Yeah.
it was just unbelievable how great he was. And when it's weird to talk to an 18-year-old, and besides him having these great chops, he had this huge, wide, and deep understanding of the music that came before him. And
Yeah, his mom was a big Webb Pierce fan, and I think she educated him quite a bit about the first wave, 46 to 55, that period is really where his expertise is. Once it gets to, by the time 1960 hits, he's done, it's like he doesn't really know about much about that period, but the period between 46 and 55, and a little bit after that, he's really knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable. I've learned a lot from him about all that. I was playing in his band, and our second bass player, Paul Martin, had been with us for maybe 7 years or so. Great player, great singer. And he had a family band with his children and his wife. She's the daughter of Dwayne Allen, the lead singer for the Oak Ridge Boys. And they live up there in Hendersonville where he lives. And he had 4 children that were really talented. And so they had a band, a family band, and they got to be so busy that he was like, well, I'm going to have to quit the Marty Stuart band because I got my own thing here, you know, that I got to take care of. They were touring a lot and playing and recording a lot and just, you know, always doing something. And so Marty says, who are we going to get? And I said, I don't know, man. So he said, well, ask around, see who's available, you know. So when I'm playing with Chris, and I said, hey, man, you got to help us find a bass player. Paul's going to resign, and, you know, we need a guy that can play electric and upright and can sing. And he goes, what about me? I said, you don't want to play with us, man. We're old. You don't want to do that. He said, I do. I'll do it. I said, well, I said, call Marty and work it out with him. Ask him, you know. And they got together, had a meeting, and Scruggs is our bass player. He's been with us for 8 years.
There's a joke that you tell sometimes where he's the best guitar player in the band.
Oh, yeah, well, that's no joke. He is the best guitar player in the band. Yeah, and he's, I've hired him on records to play drums. He's really a good drummer. I've hired him on records to play bass, guitar, steel. I mean, he's one of the best steel players in Nashville. I mean, that new record that just came out of the Sweetheart of the Rodeo tour, steel playing on that is unbelievable. He nailed Lloyd Green. Every one of those songs, I think there's 7 or 8 songs with steel. I played bass on those songs, and I just walked over to the other side of the stage, picked up the bass, and he'd sit down and play the steel on the Sweetheart of the Rodeo songs that Lloyd played on. And man, he copped Lloyd's parts unbelievably. It was unreal. It was funny because when we were just getting ready to go into rehearsals for that tour, I played a session with Lloyd Green. And Lloyd's like, so why didn't you guys call me to play that tour? I said, well, Lloyd, you're 80 years old. You want to pack your steel up, take it into the venue, set it up, do sound check, have dinner, play the show, and then break it down, carry it, get it back down to the bus every day, you know, and then the airport and the hotel and all that stuff. I said, you really want to do all that stuff? He says, well, no, but I wish you would have asked. I said, well, we kind of figured you'd say no. We figured that. He was like, well, you're right. You know.
Chris told me that he remembers playing a gig and there's Lloyd like right in front of him.
That was the first night of the tour. It was here. And Lloyd Green's out there in the audience, you know, and it was like, not only is Scruggs nervous because he's playing with Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman, you know, first night of this thing, you know, and he's got to go from being a bass player to put his finger picks on and then suddenly become a steel player halfway through the show, you know. It's like, that's not easy. And, yeah, but man, he nailed it. He never missed a lick. He's a genius. He's crazy, man. I can't believe he can play that well. Much less to cop Lloyd Green. Note for note, lick, feel for feel, just like everything was perfect. It was like unbelievable, man. I couldn't believe it. I heard that record, a couple of songs off it. I was like, man, that sounds good. That's a good little record.
That was a great tour.
It really was. And that was the only time we ever played 8 Miles High. That recording, we played it one night, the last night of the tour. And it's on there. And Roger played his butt off on that. I was like, whoa. I didn't know he had it in him. Man, he nailed it. He's still like, has that fire in him, you know? he's one of the few, old musicians that, was a star way back then. And when I play with him, he still has that. He comes at you, like I'm serious about this shit. He's really good. We played a show with him recently down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and it was acoustic. And we did 8 Miles High. And he had his acoustic 12-string thing, there. He ripped it up, man. And the audience started applauding before the song was ending, because it just kept building and getting more intense, and they were like cheering before the song was even over, It was like, wow, this is cool. He still has that certain kind of drive.
If people want you to pick a favorite guitar solo, which I don't have one, but I always say Bells Are Rimney.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite all-time guitar songs.
I was doing an interview with Chris Hillman's podcast recently, and we were talking about bird stuff, and how, I had, I'm 70 years old, so I had the first album when it came out. I was 12, right? So, or maybe I was 11. I was 11 when it came out. But I had that record because of Mr. Tambourine Man, I wanted it because it was such an unusual record, It came out of nowhere. What's this? This sounds amazing. I don't know what this is, but I like it. And so I bought the record. And then Bells of Rimney just blew me away. That was the one song that I couldn't get out of my head. And I mentioned that to Hillman. He says, that is the Byrds. He said, that one song, he said, that is everything about the Byrds. That's the song. He said, that's it. And he's not really, he's very realistic about everything. And he's not really as so enamored of his legacy as you would think, especially the Byrds era. But he had to sign off on that as being truly great. He was like, that's the real thing. That's amazing. He says,
We should say something about Harry.
Yeah.
How do you first remember, what's your earliest memories of him?
I was living back in Denver where I grew up. I'd been living in Chicago playing music, and then New York City playing music, and my band sort of dissolved under a haze of drugs and stuff, and I left, just kind of hightailed it back home and I was playing country music at night, and I was moonlighting with this band that was really cool. These two brothers, they were called the Rock Advocates. They were really great. They were like the Everly Brothers or something. They were, sibling harmony, but they were really into Rock Pile and Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds kind of music. But they wrote songs and they made records, and they were really good, excellent, just really that sibling harmony, and they were just really, kind of two guitars, bass and drums, garage rock meets the Everly Brothers and Rock Pile, They were really good. And we opened for Steve Earle and the Dukes at this club, and that's when I met Harry. That was before I ever came to Nashville. It was probably about 85 or 86. And those guys were real nice, and, I remember hanging out with Steve Earle and the Dukes, and they were all real nice guys, Harry? Well, he grew up in Nashville, and he moved to L.A. when he was probably in his late teens, early 20s, and played with, he toured around a little bit with, like, America, that band, played drums for them, and Al Stewart, he played with him. And he knew a lot of the L.A. people, and he was trying to make, living out there, trying to, work, and, he knew a lot of folks out there. And he did that for a while, and he ended up moving back to Nashville, and he, played drums on the first two Steve Earle albums, and also sang all the harmony parts on those records. And so I think that kind of catapulted him into the studio world. Here. He also, when he was a teenager, he was in a band with Mo West, who was Dottie West's son. And so I think he knew Dottie And he also toured with Etta James. He toured with her too. So he'd been around, you know. And he started getting lots of work singing on records in the 80s. And, you know, he's probably one of the most recorded harmony singers from like the mid-80s to the early 2000s. You know, he sang a lot on records, a lot, all the time. He was the musical director for the American Music Shop, that cool show that was on TNN for a while. It's a really good show. If you're not aware of it, you should go look it up. It's called The American Music Shop. It was a series. And that was really an all-star band like Mark O'Connor and Jerry Douglas and Brent Mason on guitar, and Harry was the drummer and musical director. And, you know, just a really great show. Really cool. Every episode was great. You should check it out. He played on some of Marty's records and sang on some of Marty's records. Marty had been out in LA working on a film project with Billy Bob Thornton. And it's called All the Pretty Horses. Marty wrote the music and, you know, for the movie. And so he'd been doing that forever. I think he was out there for like a year. And he had quit touring. I think he was disillusioned with the biz that he was in. You know, he was out, you know, Travis Tritt records, you know, the duets and stuff, and play, you know, those kind of drunken tours, you know, country music concerts. And, you know, I think he was kind of burnt out on all that. And so he decided maybe he wanted to get a band together, but he didn't really want to go after country radio airplay anymore, you know, because he figured he's probably too old and nobody, you know, he'd already done it, you know. So he just went kind of back to the drawing board and just decided to be, you know, just have a more smaller career, you know, playing more stuff he wants to play and doing it his way, which he did. And did it successfully. Yeah, he lives outside of the music business. You know, he's in the Marty Stuart business. He's not in the country radio music business. You know, he stepped away from that.
That's what I tell people. They say, "Are you in the music business?" I say, "I'm in the Otis Gibbs
Yeah.
business, and I'm just trying to figure that out
Yeah,
every day."
yeah. I told him years ago, I said, well, Bob Dylan invented this, you know. He quit being Bob Dylan in 1964. You know? And just did what he wanted to after that. And people didn't like it, but it didn't matter because plenty of people still would go out and purchase tickets to the show and buy the record, you know, because it's Bob Dylan. He didn't have to do it. You know, people would get mad every time he put out a record because it wasn't what they wanted to, what they thought he should be doing, you know.
But they'll still be listening to it for the next 20 years.
Probably so. I always get a kick out of that guy. He's my favorite.
He's my favorite.
Marty's a huge fan too, you know.
This makes me feel really good. You mentioned to me before that a lot of people come up to you and say they've seen these interviews that we've done.
Oh yeah,
And enjoy
more now than ever. Yeah.
That makes me feel good that people are telling you that they appreciate it. and
Oh
showing
yeah.
up at
I mean,
shows.
it happens all the time. Man, I dig your interviews with Otis Gibbs, man. You know, I hear that constantly. Probably heard it, you know, several times in the last 2 weeks. You know, I hear it all the time. I'm used to it.
People love you, Kenny.
Well, they must like you too, because I don't know how they find you, you know, how they find your stuff. I don't know. I'm really surprised at how many people listen to it, you know.